Nick, let's talk about ocean freight. Is there any nuances with ocean freight that you saw?
So ocean freight, obviously, there's two options at the end of the day: the LCL and the LCL and FCL options. So LCL is consolidated. So basically, if you have typically like under 5 pallets, 5 to 6 pallets, it's probably primary for you to go this route. Otherwise, you move to a 20-foot FCL container. So FCL containers come in three different sizes, two of which are nearly the same. So you got 20-foot, 40-foot, and 40-foot high cube. Obviously, there's also specialty stuff that we don't really want to get too far into because that's more for manufacturing or larger orders, larger pieces of cargo. So the process is similar, as I said, with the air freight. So obviously, origin client reaches out. We look at the pricing. Typically, when we worked at KN, we had the pricing on our side, so we were able to actually live quote what the shipping rates were. If there was origin pieces, meaning they had to get picked up or so forth, we would have to reach out to our origin contact to get everything aligned. So typically, if you're requesting something, it's going to take 24 hours to get a response back. It's not going to be something instantaneous for most of these freight forwarders. So once everything gets booked, obviously with the FCL container, the empty container will come into the supplier, or the supplier will pick it up and bring it to themselves to load it up. LCL, either you get it picked up, the loose pallets, or the supplier delivered to CFS. Once everything's filled, if it's LCL, it's getting consolidated with other goods. If it's FCL, container stuffed, gets brought into the port, gets ingated for the sailing that you guys booked on. So there's multiple different sailings, a lot of different options. It's a big map at the end of the day for different opportunities, whether you're on the client side, you want to play around with the shipping times or different options on pricing. And the same thing for a freight forwarder, gives a lot of different options to get the freight out. Similar to air freight comes into the U.S., runs through customs, then final delivery, depending on whether it's getting delivered locally, where it's going into a ramp. So we'd have to get it railed in over to Chicago or Indianapolis, and then it gets picked up and final delivery on that end. The biggest piece here is like where the freight forwarder is going to make their money. There's two different options, and it depends on purely on your volume, your consistency for a buyer. If you're a small buyer, typically you're looking at the FAK rates, what the spot market is. Back during COVID, we saw those prices go up to $25,000 per container. We were paying $2,500 in the same spot just a year prior. So the spot market goes with what the demand is in the market. Then there's the fixed
Nick,
market.
who sets that spot price? Is that the ocean carriers or is that the forwarders?
Yeah, so this is where the ocean carriers decide where they want to be at. There's these things called alliances. You see these alliances get created. 3 to 4 different ocean carriers would be together in an alliance. And it seems almost like a price fixing match. I used to have a board on my computer that could see how each alliance was quoting. And you can see who wanted the East Coast routings, who wanted the West Coast routings, and who wanted the inland routings. Because everyone else in that alliance would then either higher their price for inland if they wanted the one carrier to take the inland, or vice versa. The ocean carriers on the spot market is basically the live rates that the carriers are telling the freight forwarders. The freight forwarders then take those rates and then add whatever they want on top. Typically speaking, what we would do at Kunanaga was to cover 3 ocean carriers, just in case a few others drop through. So at least we had one option at all times. It adds more space for the freight forwarder to make money here, obviously. So if the top 3 range from $1,000 to $2,000 in price, we're taking the $2,000 price, adding money on top, and then we're pushing to book on the cheapest carrier at $1,000. So at the end of the day, we can make $1,500 on that one container. This became exorbitant during COVID in the spot because we were now talking about $25,000 containers, and the delta between the top 3 or 4 was anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000. So we were pushing at the highest point, saying, "Hey, we need to cover 3 to 4 carriers because shipments are getting rolled left and right. We want to make sure we get you on the boat." But at the end of the day, we were telling our origin office, "Hey, let's push for the lowest carrier possible here and make up the money that we weren't making prior to COVID."
What was that spread between your destination and origin office typically?
So typically how it works out for most freight forwarders is they will tell their origin office how much they're selling for so they can do a profit share. So the origin office will take half of whatever the delta is on that shipment. It gives the origin office more drive to become more profitable because the fact that if they get the lower carrier, they can make up that money. But that's how the profit share is split. And given some freight forwarders use agents, it's the same exact thing. They advise what they sold it for, split the profit. But yeah, during COVID, there was a lot of money being moved around just because of the fact of how frantic the market was, and we didn't know what was going to get loaded and what was not. So we had to cover as many options as possible so we didn't have to go back to the buyer or the customer and say, "Hey, we need to requote this again because the rates are not aligned. We want to make sure that we're covering at least the top of the market so we can have all options on the table.
That's super interesting. The fact that you have these alliances, which sounds like a nice way to say cabal or cartel. And it's
Yeah.
funny, if you look back at all of the price fixing and just lawsuits that have come out internationally over the last 50 years, a good portion of them have been through ocean carriers in particular. But you've got these groups here that are really just focused on carving up the country, carving up the market. And the fact that you as a forwarder are looking at and not necessarily getting the benefit of the lowest carrier as a brand is pretty remarkable.